Greetings everyone. I'm known on the internet as the channel Otis Wong. I'm currently 18 in undergraduate, and today talk about. I'm going to review this um, essay by Kurt from the Theory of Everything channel. I think it's quite well written, and I agree with most of the points there, but I'd like to put my own spin on it, and I have a few points that I disagree with him. So in context here, what this essay is about is talking about the recent interview that Neil deGrasse Tyson had with a philosopher that's also a physicist, by the way, uh, on his podcast, like Starlink, right? And and they so what they talked about on that particular podcast is that um we should have one foot in and out for philosophy and physics, such that we can have a cake and eat it too, if you will, because they base this off on, well, the great physicists in the past, like for example Isaac Newton, famous example, like he's an alchemist, a very devout theologian, but yet he is the person who unified the celestial motion of the planets and the apparent gravitational force attracting the apple to the earth. He's the first person to have a grand unified theory of everything. And the earlier example of that would be Aristotle, which formulated the theory of the four elements, and it's a very complicated idea, but essentially, his idea is what caused science to exist in the first place. So they rationalize that, okay, well, if that's the case, maybe with the stagnation of science right now, like we don't have anything, we don't have new breakthroughs in the theory of everything, not a lot of confirmation and all that. Maybe we should revert back to the old ways and follow the path of our ancestors. So of course, Neil deGrasse Tyson does not hold this point of view this much. What he thinks about is that we should separate religion and your own personal opinions away from science, because we shouldn't let the personal perceptions of a thing affect our judgment of a thing, because that makes us biased, and it affects, like, it's not how science works. And the philosopher slash physicist, she said, isn't that in it of itself a philosophical grounding? Isn't that a stance? And of course he can't think of a comeback, right? Which, well, I think she did a fair good job. Like, I agree with that. There isn't, we can't really make any judgment or statement if we don't have any axioms to base ourselves off from. Okay, that's just how the human cognition works. sure, we have to be as unbiased as possible, but we also have to be humble, right? I guess, and realize that as human beings, it is impossible to achieve this perfection of you know not having your axioms fog your point of view. So really, we should really find the center between two extremes. Actually, we shouldn't be too axiomatic, because if we assume everything to be this way, then our observations are just gonna end up in this way. We'll just have a confirmation bias, um, a, a Dunning-Kruger effect, right? But if we don't have any axioms to base ourselves off from, then there aren't any meaningful interpretations that you can extract away from the experiment, like after it's done. And before it's done, you don't you don't have anything to base yourself off from. Like anything we do have a telos, as Aristotle have said, right? To clarify what telos is that imagine a seed, an apple seed. The seed would eventually grow up to be a tree, right? So the end goal, the end purpose of that seed is to grow up to be a tree. It's the final destination of a thing, synonymous with the purpose of a thing. Okay, so every person, no matter what they do, have a motivation, correct? So no matter what they do, they have they have to base themselves off from some assumed axioms, and then whatever they do have to follow through that. Okay. Say, why are you going down the streets to buy groceries? It's because you're hungry. Okay. Why are you hungry? Why do you want to feel your hunger? Because you want to live. Okay. So there's always a motive behind what you do. As rational creatures, this is the thought process we have to go through, and you can't really escape that. So so it's the you have to have the best of both worlds, right? You don't want to be too eccentric on your axioms on one hand, and you can't be too eccentric on having no axioms at all on the other. There's actually a book written by some mathematicians. Okay, so it's about how 1 plus 1 equals 2. Okay, like that's like it like if all of humanity failed to follow through 1 plus 1 equals 2 because they couldn't prove that 1 plus 1 equals 2, then we would be set aback by eons, centuries. Okay, we couldn't progress forwards until we solve this problem of 1 plus 1 equals 2. So they wrote a whole book of how 1 plus 1 equals 2, the most basic primordial understanding of science, no, of anything. So there has to be a sacrifice to be made. We have to assume that 1 plus 1 equals 2 axiomatically, such that we can progress forwards as a society. Okay, and I also by the way, I also watched the recent debate between you know Dr. Weiping Yu and he's a NASA scientist, right? So and then he's debating Terrence Howard, and uh Terrence Howard says 1 times 1 equals 2. Okay, well, let's think about this. Okay, you know um uh maybe we have to. I think it's this idea of not having axioms taken to the extremes. It's just the same case as 1 plus 1 equals 2, but now it's 1 times 1 equals 2. I see a great parallel here. Of course, 1 times 1 equals 1. But, if you want to question it, you can, and then society would just be fixated on this problem and never move forwards. It's the people, they say this idea is absurd, but they don't really realize the implications to it. Why is he asking this question? People don't realize it, but I think it's, we have to, like, instead of, making fun of such an eccentric idea, we should actually tackle the problem from its roots. Okay, what makes him come to this conclusion? And in my opinion, it is because we as a society push this idea of not having any axioms, and that's why he thinks this way. So really, the problem isn't on him. More so, it's the problem of us. We as a society has failed this particular individual by not explaining the terms well, and pushing this idea of a non-axiomatic worldview, and that's why we're now as a society asking questions that don't even that are even like they are like the most basic things we can ever conceive of as human beings. So what's the correct way of doing this? Well, Kurt says here that there should be a distinction between, say, professional philosophy and coffee table philosophy. Well, I don't think it's a correct approach. Well, he's quoting Wheeler, and of course John Wheeler is this great scientist. So there really isn't a good reason for me to to question it, I guess. But for the sake of this video, and it's philosophy, so I can say whatever I want without any backlash. So here's what I think. Okay, so this idea of a distinction between different types of philosophy, I think it's poisonous to society, because as I've said previously, philosophy should be correct. It's the any answer you give in philosophy should be correct. Okay, so this is my thesis, my proposition, if you will. I personally believe that the answers to philosophy isn't the ends of itself. It's rather it's the means, and what the actual goal is in philosophy is the process behind it. It's the thought process. Okay. My rationale for this is that you really can't distinguish something to be right or wrong until you analyze it. And saying that, this certain branch of philosophical stance is wrong and thus shouldn't be taken seriously isn't good, because that defeats the whole purpose of, as I've said, not being biased. It opens you up to the vice of being biased. Also, it limits the amount of engagement in conversations, like meaningful, rational conversations. If you assume the other side is already wrong right on the bat, then there is nothing to say. There is nothing to debate about. So it defeats the whole purpose of thinking, investigating, and to some extent the scientific method, because it's about questioning, hypothesizing, and then testing the idea, and there is no thing to test if that thing is wrong. Furthermore, when you go through the process of philosophical discussion, you're not fully wrong, right? You're not always, like, even if the outcome, the final answer is wrong, the process, it doesn't mean every single step of your philosophical ideology is wrong, right? Like what this idea, right, distinguishing professional and coffee table, what it does is that it limits us from taking the good out of the bad, right? Taking what's good and leaving out what's bad. Okay, and here it talks about empiricists. Okay, and by the way, I actually agree to some points of what he's talking about, like reality shouldn't be viewed in this basic materialistic way, because ultimately equations and mechanisms and how things work and move, they are really metaphysical objects, and you can't really use your five senses to detect them. Okay, I get it. I agree that empiricism is wrong. Okay, but I don't quite like his approach in criticizing empiricism. Okay, so let me show you this quote, right? The empiricists were a marginal medical sect in antiquity. By the 18th century, the empirics were routinely derided as medical quacks. Okay, now let's break down what he's trying to say. He is saying that because the empiricists, they medical quacks, that's why if you identify with empiricists now, which, by the way, the definition of empiricism changes throughout history, the same way any modern English word have been. It was derived in French, Latin, all that stuff. Like, concepts change over time. and now he's saying, okay, now, because based on this one definition from a very long time ago that doesn't apply right now, they are medical quacks, and somehow it makes you a medical quack for identifying yourself as such. Okay, I see a few fallacies here, not just one, right? The first and most stunning logical fallacy in this particular sentence is appeal to semantics, because we have different definitions of what empiricism means. So it really isn't fair to say that this is what they believe in right now. Medical quackery and all, and to some extent that is appeal, like that is ad hominem, because it doesn't really add to his argument, but it's more of an insult, which isn't so great. But I guess he has to have some views, right? Like you have to like be spicy in your videos to and like to get views. Like I mean I get it. Like maybe this sentence isn't an argument, but it's more of a a statement for eyeballs. In this case, it's all fine. I totally get where he's coming from. And by the way, just as a reader of this, and a frequent viewer of his channel, just a side note, right? Like his essay and his normal videos are really different. Like the tone is quite different. In his normal videos, it's just like he's calm, like collected. His words are really well defined. But on his essay though, it's like it's two totally different persons. It's he's like I can physically feel like some kind of passion, okay, to put it in better words, right? Passion that's coming out of the screen. He like it's colorful sentence structures, okay. I don't have problems with both. Like I quite like it. Just a side note. Personally, I don't like reading long explanations. Like maybe just add some like flavor to it. Like it makes it more engaging. Like so I quite appreciate what he's doing here with his essay. But assuming that this sentence is for say an argument, then I have a problem with that. Okay, moving on to the next logical fallacy he has in this philosophical essay, is that let me quote this, right? By the way, you wanna know who else does philosophy for physics? every physicist who's ever debunked a theory. Okay, that's blatant appeal to authority. That okay, just because they're physicists doesn't mean that they're doing physics right. So what's my personal opinion of how we can reconcile philosophy and science? Okay, I mean, like, this is a philosophy video, so I can say whatever I want without, like, I can be wrong, like blatantly wrong, but if you guys follow through my logical steps, then then take that and then leave out the rest, right? Take out what you think is good. Okay, so here's my suggestion to how we can we can join philosophy and science together. Okay, so let's talk about Kepler, right? He's the the scientist who discovered the three rules of planetary motion. Okay, now before he formalized his theory of how the planets circle around the sun in elliptical orbits, he had a really esoteric, right? Let's just put it that way, esoteric, new agey, theory, if you will, about the how the Platonic shapes, the 5 Platonic shapes can like embed itself with each other, and then in spheres, and then somehow it explains the ratio between the distances of the planets relative to the sun. That that stuff, okay, is what caused him to later later formalize his 3 laws, right? It's his motivation. If he had not done those weird esoteric analysis on the planets, had he not done that, we wouldn't have the 3 laws we know today. So really, if you really follow through his method, philosophy comes first, and then science. You can't have science without philosophy. It's sort of like a scaffold, right? The bones of a building, philosophy, right? And science is the bricks and walls you later put on those scaffoldings. Okay, it's the starting point of something, but you shouldn't like stay there. You shouldn't stay there forever. You have to eventually turn your philosophy into science, a quantifiable science, a qualitative analysis on one hand, which is philosophy, and then what follows through is the quantitative version of it in science. As I've said in the start of the video, I talked about Aristotle and his 4 elements. Had he not formulated that idea, that's largely based on philosophy and not science at all, not empirical science at least. Had he not done that, there wouldn't be science today. So again, we can see this trend of how philosophy gives rise to science, and that philosophy has to come first. A philosophical idea works on paper, that being, it's qualitatively valid, but being sound in reality, it takes science to confirm it. It is only right after Kepler decided to grab a pen and write down his equations and calculations that the real shift between heliocentrism and geocentrism started to happen. Also, one more criticism from this essay is this quote: "Most physicists are already engaging in assuming philosophy; they just don't know it." Okay, now let's break down this quote. Now, if he, affirms that physicists and scientists are already engaging in philosophy, then what's the whole point in writing the essay? If they already are doing it, there's no need to convince them to do it if they're already doing it, right? Do you understand my logical flow? Like, the whole point of making an argument is to convince the other side to change. But if the other side already agrees with you in the first place, then why bother writing the argument? Oh, and in addition to all of what I've said, there are more cases in which philosophy has benefited the scientific world, the academic world. For example, the origin of knot theory, right? The theory about how the knots can be uniquely tied without crossing itself, and without turning into another knot, right? The example would be the unknot and the trefoil. Okay, like the origin of this idea came from the failed theory of everything, which was largely based on philosophy. And this theory of everything is, of course, the ether, where Lord Kelvin, right, has wrongly assumed that every element in the periodic table can be explained by how the knots are tied together. So it doesn't really matter what the answer to the problem is for philosophy. So that's my first point proven, right? Rather, it's the thought process behind of it, because if we don't take that approach, then we wouldn't have knot theory in mathematics right now. And the second point this brings out is that philosophy comes first. The qualitative component to a thing comes first, right? He thinks that the knots are tied and then it makes the elements. So that's the qualitative analysis to a thing. And then later he finds out that the math doesn't work out. So that's a quantitative analysis. The same thing as being valid but not sound. I.e., your logic works, but it doesn't actualize in physical reality. In conclusion, I agree with the stance of Kurt, but I disagree with the few points that he brings out. I appreciate this conversation about, you know, unionizing philosophy and physics, um, because this is what has worked out in the past and perhaps would continue to work out in the future. As Eric Weinstein has pointed out in one of his lectures, that the he showed a graph, right, of the ages of scientists that's working on the theory of everything, and he sees a stagnation, a stagnation in the theoretical world, that the youngest scientists that's working on stuff like this is like 60 and 70 years old, you know whereas in the past, there's an explosion of 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 young scientists that are trying to make the world a better place. After all, Newton was 25 before he finished calculus and his theory of everything before he died. I think that's due to dogma, right? Of physicists treating their equations for granted without questioning the philosophical basis and qualitative meaning behind their numbers. As Sabine Hossenfelder pointed out in her book, which I've purchased, I've read through the first chapter, that theoretical physicists right now are lost in math. Okay. Perhaps further discussion in this topic would save the world from continue to stagnate.